Hi, it's Jo from Minerva. Today we're going to do a sew along of my most favourite pattern, which is the Grainline Studio Scout Tee. The Grainline Studio Scout Tee is a beginner pattern, has one triangle. It's from an American company, so you'll see all of the measurements in imperial measurements. It goes from size 0 to 18, which is a bust 32 to 44. It doesn't use very much material, which is why I like it, because you can choose a really special fabric and you don't need so much of it, so you can make a real statement piece. You can also use up lots of little bits of material, so I have lots of embroidered fabrics here. So this is a very light lawn, cotton lawn, and this is a double gauze, and they're both embroidered, and I used the last little bits up of my fabric to make the Scout Tee. Lots of fabrics are suitable for this pattern. It is a woven t-shirt pattern. You don't often get that. You often get a t-shirt pattern with jersey fabrics, or a woven pattern with darts and waist shaping and collars and things. So it's a flat tee used with woven fabrics. You could make a viscose one, you could make cotton, you could use cotton gauze. I've made cord ones to wear in the autumn, so I make the sleeves a little bit longer and wear a cardigan with it. You can use a poplin, which is probably the best fabric to get started if you're a beginner. The fabric that I'm using today is a Rose Hubble floral cotton poplin. It's great if you're a beginner. It doesn't shift about, it's not too thin, but there are a few cutting things to know when you're cutting out a Grainline Studio Tee, because you will need to cut a piece for the neckline on the bias. On this top, I've made the bias fold over to the front so that I can get that white line to tie in the sleeves. And the same on this one. This is a sort of dobby fabric with a raised thread in it. So here you can see the neckline is folded over. On the pattern, the technique is to put the bias on the inside and fold it into the inside, and then you top stitch to get this very flat front. And a mistake one that I'm going to show you, I had a ridiculously small amount of fabric to use up here, and I tried to cut the neckband not on the bias. I just cut a straight strip off the selvage edge that I had left, but it's really wrinkly because there's not enough stretch in the fabric to pull around the neck. I still wear it because it's a really useful solid top. Sometimes I wear it under a jacket and things, and actually I've washed it so many times now that it's got a sort of denim edge hem wrinkled effect, so I just wear it as it is. You can also choose a fabric that has a touch of stretch in it, so if you chose a cotton that has a little bit of stretch, you even on any fabric, when you put it down on the cutting table or the floor or wherever you cut it, you can get a little, you can feel and see where you get the most stretch, just so that you've got more movement room around the shoulders. We're going to pop over to the cutting table now, and I'll show you how to cut the Scout Tee. I'm going to make today's pattern as if you are a beginner, as if this is the first garment that you've ever tried to make. So I'll be explaining things more than I normally would. So, you know, I'm going to show you how to hem, I'm going to show you how to insert a sleeve, and also how to put the neckband on. If you're new to sewing and you need a few tips for cutting out, you can fold your fabric in half. You can put your pattern side together. That means you can make any markings or changes to the pattern, or lengthening it or shortening it. You can do that on the back of the fabric. The first pattern marking to look for on the Scout Tee is that you place both the front and the back on the fold. So once you've got your fabric folded, you can just check any patterns aren't running out. And pin your pattern in place. If you need to lengthen or shorten the top, now's the time to do it. So you would cut along this line and then move the bodice down if you need to make the body longer. It is quite a short top. It's quite a neat sort of short shape. And if you want it to be cropped, you can move it up. Now, if you're a beginner, it's sort of tempting not to mess with that line and to just, well, you want it a bit longer, just add some to the bottom. But really, if you want to add to the body length, this is the narrowest part here. So that's why it's encouraging you to do it here, because then you get this nice wide bit moving down and you get the narrow part of the body where your waist is lengthened in that area, not just added onto the bottom, because you're a different shape here maybe to what you are here. Okay, if you're new to sewing, let's take a look at a sleeve. So you're going to cut out a sleeve. I've cut my top with the pattern pieces going down, so I need to make sure that I keep my sleeve in the same direction. If I start to put my sleeve in this direction, then of course I'm working with that slightly stretchier grain, which would be quite good for a sleeve, but then I'll be changing the direction of the flowers. So I'm going to keep it this way. So it's got a grain line arrow on it, which means I need to keep it parallel with the grain line fold that I folded here. I can turn it upside down because then my grain line fold is still in the same place, but obviously I'm changing the direction of the print. What I can't do is tilt it like this, because then I'm working on the bias of the fabric and my sleeve will stretch out and it won't fit in the armhole. So I'm going to cut this out, and then I'm going to put these markings on the pattern, and I can use a piece of chalk, or I can just put a little snip in the fabric, and these show two marks, two notches show the back sleeve, and one mark shows the front sleeve. The one on the top shows the mark that will join up to your shoulder seam. And if you don't do it, when you come to sew your top, you won't know which is the front and the back. And at first glance it appears it's symmetrical, but it isn't symmetrical. If you folded it in half, you would see that the back of the sleeve, you'll see that the back of the sleeve has more fabric in it, because that's got to go around your shoulder blade when you move your arm. So pin this down, cut it out, and then we're going to chalk mark these points. So I'm going to mark here to show that's the front of that sleeve. I'm going to mark here to show that's the back. And I'm not going to use the grain line one. This was slightly tilted to the front. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. Okay, we cut the bodice on the length grain, we cut the sleeve on the length grain, and we had the crosswise grain that had a little give in it, and now we're going to cut on the bias. So we're going to make our fabric have a 45-degree angle. So we're going to imagine that this is a square, and we're going to fold it from corner to corner. And we're following this red flower along here, so we know we've got it on that grain. And now we get a really stretchy piece of fabric, and that's what we need to go around the neckband. if you're just experimenting with this pattern for the first time, you could use a piece of ready-made bias binding just so that you can get the technique. So my two pieces, and they're cut on the bias, and you can see how much give now the fabric has. If you join two pieces together, you've got to join on the bias as well. So you'll be sewing that corner to corner so that when you fold it, that stretch continues. Once you've cut your pieces out, so you'll have a front on the fold, back on the fold, a sleeve piece and your neck binding, then it's time to start sewing. I'm going to just use my sewing machine today. I'm not going to use the overlocker because I'm assuming that maybe if you're new and this is one of your first garments, then you've just got a sewing machine. So I'm going to show you how to finish all the edges with a normal sewing machine. First thing to do is to remove your paper pieces, and you're going to sew the shoulder seams together. The seam allowance on this pattern is 1.5 centimetres, so you need to keep that throughout, otherwise you won't get the size that you've measured for in the first instance. And also, if you don't use the same seam allowances all the way through, then different parts of your pattern might not fit into each other or next to each other. So you can pin at 1.5 centimetres and then sew with a straight stitch along this shoulder seam, and then you're also going to sew down the side seams with a straight stitch. Which is a stitch you would see on a hem or on a side seam of your clothes. And then we should have a sort of vest shape made. When you're getting to the beginning or the end, sew to the end, find the back stitch on your machine, so there'll be a button to press to go backwards. Go backwards a few stitches and forwards a few stitches, and that means you can just cut the ends off, the thread ends off, because you've gone over the stitching there, so it won't come undone. It's important when you're making garments to press the seams open as you go along and not just think, I'll give it a good press at the end. So I'm going to press these seams open by folding the seam allowance back and ironing down that seam so that it spreads the fabric out flat. And then on the right side, it will really help all the fabric and the pattern blend in. These ends will fray if we just leave them like this. So we're going to change the stitch on the sewing machine to a zigzag and run each end of the seam allowance through the machine with a zigzag. When you've finished all the edges, you can pop the top aside and we can take a look at the sleeve. Make sure all your markings are in place before you remove the pattern. And the first thing you're going to do is to make some easing stitches, and this will help the sleeve head go into the sleeve hole. So take your machine from the zigzag to a normal straight stitch, but a really long one, as long as you can get it. So mine's on 5, and the marks, there's one here and here. Between those marks, with the foot just running along the edge of the fabric, I'm going to make a row of stitches. Now these stitches aren't permanent, so I can take them out, but I'm going to make sure they're less than 1.5 from the edge, because 1.5 is my seam allowance, so I want my easing stitches to be inside that. I'm not going to go forwards and backwards this time, because I'm going to gather these threads up a little bit. So that's the first time we're using the markings, is to put an easing stitch between those 2 marks. And you can see already what's happened to my fabric when I've put this row of easing stitches in. It's curled up the sleeve head for me without me even doing anything. You can spread those along a little bit so they're not all in one place. So I've already got a little space there for my shoulder. Let me see. Now, with right sides facing, I'm going to put the sleeve sides together. This is the bit that goes under your arms, and I'm going to keep that 1.5 seam allowance and sew and finish down there the same as I sewed and zigzagged my shoulder and side seams. In an area of your body that you're not going to see very much, like in your underarm, you can just zigzag both seam allowances together and press it to one side. So that's another way to finish a seam. I quite like to split it open down the side and across the shoulder, because you see that, and so you want that to be really nice and flush. But right under my arm, I just zigzag those together. Right, now we're going to work on something really skillful. So we're going to put a sleeve in. So we want our sleeve right side out, our top inside out, so that we can put them right sides together. So you're going to slip the sleeve into the hole, and the first place that I'm going to pin is the underarm. So I'm matching the underarm seam that I just showed you with the underarm seam of the top. We're going to find our 4 key points first. So along the top should be our mark that we made that goes on the shoulder seam. So that's the notch that was on the top of the sleeve head. And then we should be matching up 2 notches on the sleeve with the 2 notches on the top, and that tells you that you've got the sleeve in the right way round. If you haven't, then this sleeve belongs to the opposite armhole. So you mark those 4 key points first. Notice I'm putting the pins in a little bit differently now. I'm putting them with the I'm putting them in vertically, and then putting them with the top out, so I don't keep scratching myself and stabbing myself. So now we should be able to fill in the underarm. The underarm is easy because between the underarm and the first notch there, the fabric is pretty much the same length. And now the skillful part is to take all of this loose fabric here and fit it to this, and that's what that easing stitch is for. So we can pull one of those threads and that will gather the sleeve a little bit and make that fabric length a little bit shorter. You need to be spreading this gathers along so they're not all in one place. Also, because your fabric is cut a little not on the grain, there is a little bit of movement there. So I'm going to keep pinning. I'm going to be pulling the top and letting the sleeve fill the space behind. And if it's your first time, it is tricky because you might get a few little puckers in it, and you'll start to realise that you need a lot of pins to gather in all of that fabric behind. So I'm probably going to get a little pucker there when I put it under the machine. I'm just going to add another one there. Every time there's a little hill in the fabric, just going to squash it out flat with a pin. So you should be having a lot of pins in there to hold that fabric down flat. And you keep working the other side the same. Don't try moving the sleeve around to get rid of that fullness. You need to pull the easing stitches. I'm going to pull this side a little bit now. And continue to pin. Okay, we'll see the second reason for putting our pins in like this is now we can put this armhole under the machine, and because we've put the pins in, we can sew from either side. Now, the best way to sew it is from the inside of the sleeve. So you're sewing on the inside of the sleeve, so that you've got the sleeve looking at you and the top touching the foot plate. Again, it's the 1.5 seam allowance, and we're going to sew all the way around and then zigzag all the way around. Don't sew over the pins, pull those out as you go along. And when you get to the more gathered places, try and smooth out the fabric with your fingertips. You don't need that easing stitch now, that can come out. So if you pull it, it will just release that spare fabric a little bit, and then your sleeve head can open. And then you can press your seam. And on the inside, you can zigzag around all those edges so that your insides of your sleeve don't fray. Okay, whether you've joined your neck binding or not, I've joined two pieces together, but you could have got a full piece out of your fabric. You're going to put it right sides together and stitch the short ends so that you've got a complete neck binding. Okay, you're going to pin the binding to the neckline with the right side facing. Again, I'm going to do that pinning technique where I have my pins pointing up so they're not scratching me. Pin the binding, and then I'm going to sew it with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to keep working this round. Distributing all of the neckband, a little bit the same as we did with the sleeve, making sure that that fullness is just taken in. As I get further round, I can distribute. There you go, it's gone already. So I'm going to sew the neck binding on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now you're going to do what's called grading the seam allowance. So you're going to trim away some of the seam allowance off the binding. So you'll need some really small scissors. If you're wielding a pair of dressmaking scissors at this, you can really easily like clip into your garment. These scissors come with my dressmaking scissors. They're a really good pair. I'll put them in the product list below. So when you grade out the seam allowance, you're taking away half of the bulk that you would have behind that seam. So you're taking out some of the seam allowance off the binding, but you're leaving the seam allowance from the top. The next thing to do to get a really nice smooth neckline is to clip both allowances sort of every inch or so, or every half an inch, but not go through the fabric, and that's a job you need to do carefully, not quickly. But again, little scissors work, because if you put big scissors in there and clip, you can clip your fabric underneath. So little scissors are perfect for this. And when you clip, then your binding can roll over and make a curve shape. When you understitch, you take the seam allowance and the top and press it all towards the binding, and then from the right side you're going to sew everything away from the top. An understitch helps to fold the fabric down so the fabric won't pop up and start to reveal itself around the neckline. Right, we're going to have a look quite closely now at the final finish. So you're going to turn your neck binding to the seam line and then fold it down. I'm going to put my pins in straight this time because I want it to hold like quite a good length of fabric as I go along. Again, I'm going to fold my fabric to the seam line and then down again, and that will reveal that little row of understitching, and you'll see that your neck binding is really neat then. Where it's curved, just want to make sure that all of that fabric is flat and you've not got any little puckers on the reverse. I'm going to continue to put that neck binding on all the way round. If you think it will help and you've not got too much experience under the machine yet, you could tack that down with a needle and thread, just some big running stitches, and then you can take the pins out and then you can handle it more easily under the machine foot. And when you first take the binding out of the machine from sewing it, you'll think, oh no, that's all a mess, I don't know, that's not how I want it to look. But you press it and you can get it very flat. A little bit of steam on there just really helps all those layers to sit flat, and on the inside you've got that really neat binding. So you've got the row of understitching and the row of stitching that you've just attached it with. All the tricky stuff's finished. It's now time to finish the hem. To create the hem, you just need to take your top to the ironing board. You're going to press down 1/4 inch and then turn it down and press it again another 1/4 inch, and that's called a double folded hem. You can hand stitch the hem down. So if you've got a delicate fabric, you can hand stitch that down, or if you've got a busy fabric like this, you can just top stitch across with a matching thread. And that's the same for the sleeves. So you're going to fold a 1/4 inch and press, and then fold again 1/4 inch and press, and then you can sew around there as well. This pattern is really versatile, so you could lengthen it, you could lengthen the sleeves. There is a, if you've put #Scout Tee in our website, then you will find some links to the Grainline Studio website where you can get an add-on pack, and that will give you some options to have a sort of petal sleeve, a crossover back, long sleeves. So if you've been using the Scout Tee for a long time, there are options just to keep it moving in your wardrobe. Okay, here's my Scout Tee finished. Really nice flat neck, and it comes from that neck you take away from the machine. You think, oh my goodness, what have I done? But it just needs a really good press. You've got your side seams pressed open, your little hem, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, and there are no darts in this top, so if you have a bust size larger than a C cup, then you might need to do a full bust adjustment, which would mean making more fullness here, but you need to follow another tutorial for that. But if you like this pattern, it's tagged below, so is the fabric. Have an explore. You could use this pattern for so many different fabrics. If you don't think you can quite go for a full bust adjustment yet, and you're looking for a similar type of top, then the Cashmerette Montrose top is very similar, but it's a pattern that has a full bust that goes up to a GH cup. So you've got darts that just help with the shaping there, and it's got the short sleeves and the scoop neck. So similar skills to the ones that I've just shown you, but you might get a different fitting range there. If you're new to sewing, then I hope that has given you a little bit of confidence and a few new skills under your belt. So now you can do a double folded hem, you can insert a sleeve, you can add a neck binding, and you can finish and press your sides open. So there's a whole world of patterns out there that you can try. Thank you very much for watching. Please come again soon.